talking to you about my debt story, just to give you some background on me and kind of how I do my budgeting now. So in 2005, I moved to Portland with my now husband, and at the time I was living with his family, so I was living there, and I basically started to just go to school, start working. After about a year, we moved into our first place together. At that point, I had lost my job around the same time and went to get into a new job. That job he ended up working at as well, so we ended up working together, and at the time we were both making the most money we had made in our like whole careers. And at the time we're like, you know, 20 something, so it was really exciting at the time, because we're like, man, we're making so much money, you know. And at that point we thought like, we've already got our bills covered and we can just start like going doing whatever we want, you know. So we weren't really like paying attention to how much we spent. We just kind of spent whatever we wanted. And then after a year, actually preface this, before we actually were let go from our jobs, like the first day or two I was there, they basically told me that we were gonna get laid off, but it was so far out that they weren't really sure when it was gonna be, and it had taken me a while to find that job, so I really didn't want to just up and quit after I've already been trained and I was making good money. So I was going to that job. We had an apartment, everything was going really well. There was not even an end date exactly at our job, and we really liked it, you know, so we just kept going. Eventually they were like, okay, well, we're gonna lay you off and this is when it's coming up. You'll get a severance package. It's very, you know, small, but they were nice enough to actually hook us up with some people to try to help us get retrained, which was really nice. And a lot of companies I know don't do that. So basically when we got let go from our job, it was getting outsourced because it was a call center. So they said that we qualified for a retraining program. So one piece of advice I'll give you is, if anything happens to you where you're like, this is just really crappy, like why is this happening to me, always try to look into if it's an opening to do something better. Like maybe it's an opportunity that you just can't see because you're focusing on the negative that it is at the moment. So I was actually really appreciative because I went and applied for this retraining program that was through the unemployment department in our state. And what that meant was that I could go get unemployment without the requirement of looking for a job, but it was required that I went to school full-time. So before this, I was already going to school a little bit anyway, so it made sense for me just to go back full-time. So that's what I decided to do. My husband also did the same thing, but this is where we made a mistake. And the old me, I would tell, don't do this. So basically what we did is we said, okay, well, we're getting 70% of our income still. We don't have any debt because our cars are old and we've paid them off like in advance. So we don't have that problem. You know, we are still renting an apartment, but we just kind of lived like we did before. We didn't really think it through. So you don't want to do that. In my mind, I was like, well, we're still making okay money and we're just going to school. Let's just live like we are right now. So don't do that, because that is a mistake. So what ended up happening was, because of the fact that we were accustomed to living a specific way and just not budgeting or looking at any type of finances, when we were earning less income, we were still spending the same. So what ends up happening is you put money on credit cards thinking it'll be fine. So for us, we would have like a 0% interest credit card, and we would just spend basically whatever we wanted and didn't really think about it at the time. Then later when we would pay it, we would just pay a small percentage of it. And then after a while we're like, okay, we're about to run out of zero interest line. We need to pay it off by this date, otherwise we're gonna owe all of this interest. So what we would end up doing is opening another credit card to kind of cover for that one. So we would end up transferring the balance from the 0% interest credit card, whatever was left on it, transfer it to a new card. But then we were stupid and we kept still spending money because we weren't obviously thinking like, eventually this is going to catch up to us, because we're like, oh, we're paying off a little bit, and then we're just racking up more debt. So at one point I sat down and I did the math on it, and I was like, oh my gosh, we owe like $18,000 in credit card debt. It had just accumulated so fast. I don't know how it even got that much. So what we decided to do, it wasn't like something I really wanted to do, but eventually we broke down and said, okay, look, this is the situation. We owe this much debt. We're gonna keep going in debt. We need to change something. This isn't working. Obviously, what we're doing is not helping. So what we ended up doing was we still kind of transferred the balances around, but we made a pact that we weren't gonna spend a ton more money. We were just gonna actually live on a budget. And another thing of way of getting down our bills was to move out of our apartment, which I didn't want to do. I ended up having to cut the lease short, but we didn't really have $700 and something to pay the rent at that time. We were just hoping for the best. So that was a big savings right there. It was just getting rid of the rent. So we moved in with his mother. We basically, at that point, what I would recommend anybody to do, and what I ended up having to do, was just take all of our bills, all of the balances on credit cards, all of like any type of bill or expense that we had, and write it down. And you want to also write down your balances. You want to write down how much the interest is on all of your cards. That way you can kind of figure out exactly where you're at. So the higher interest cards are the ones that I try to pay off the fastest, and I put the most money towards those. That way I could just get rid of those. Luckily, most of our debt in the credit card department was on those 0% interest credit cards. But what I still ended up transferring the balances around, but what I did was I made a plan, and I said, okay, by this date, I need to have X amount of dollars paid off, or I need to have another credit card to pay off that debt the rest of the way. So by living with his mom, I was actually able to take my unemployment check and strictly just pay it on debts. So that way we weren't accumulating new things, and we weren't paying utilities. We were just paying, at that point, we were just paying the basic necessities to live, just food and gas, that type of thing. So that's strictly what I focused on at that point. So we would get down to like the last month of the 0% interest credit card. I would find another one, reapply, transfer that balance, whatever was left, onto another one. And then at that point, we would have another year to get away with the 0% interest credit card part. But we wouldn't accumulate more debt. We were just strictly paying down the debt that we already had. So it's not always the most efficient way to do it, but at the time I didn't really have any knowledge of debt or never really figured it out. So that was the only plan I could come up with at the time that wasn't like trying to have someone refinance our debt, because I always hear those aren't very good. So that was kind of like my plan that I made. And then I would keep track of like how much we paid off, and as I would see it progress down, it would be more motivating to keep going in that direction. So the credit card debt we got paid off. Then of course we were still in, well, I was still in school. He had not stopped going to school at some point. So I was still going to school. And then what I would do is just take, and I would also note all of my loans, because I didn't qualify for any financial aid like grants or anything like that. It was strictly loans. So when I got out of school, it was actually quite a bit of debt just for going to like community college and things. So I wrote all of that down. I went through all of my balances, wrote out where I was starting from and what the interest rates are. So basically I would pay the highest interest rate first, pay as much money as I could, still paying some on the other one, so I would still meet a minimum balance, but maybe like 100 here, 100 there, etc. But then maybe the biggest balance, put 400 on, something large. That way I could try to get those debts paid down faster. So once you have your highest debt paid down and that one's gone, then at that point take all the money from that one, go ahead and either put the whole amount or a large chunk of it on your next highest bill. So let's say this one was 7% interest, you're paying $500 a month, trying to get that one paid down quickly. You get that paid down, you take that $500, you say, okay, I'm gonna put 400 on the next bill because that one's 6% interest, and split the 100 between all the smaller bills. So you're basically keep piling on more payments to the point where you're getting one bill paid off completely quickly. So I kept doing that to the point where I got down to 0 student loan debt. So that took actually quite a while. And then once I got employed in my field, I would just keep adding more money onto these bills. Like I try to pay as much as humanly possible because I just wanted to get out of debt. So I was actually able to get out of debt fairly quickly, considering how much I had to pay, and considering the fact that when I was living with my mother-in-law, eventually I did have to pay some bills. You know, you can't just live off people forever, so I would start paying utilities just to keep things going in the household. But at that point I had enough money paid off that I was actually able to afford that. So those are some of my recommendations. And one of the things I look at now and say is, you know, at the time I was so stressed out about, oh my gosh, I'm gonna lose my job and this is awful. Like, why would they, for my other thought, why did they hire me if they're gonna just let me go in like a month? But even though it seemed like a crazy idea at the time, I'm really happy that I stuck it out, because a lot of people that day that we got the announcement just left. They quit the same day, they were unemployed, and then they had to go to another job. But they didn't let me go for almost 2 years. So that was 2 years of income and work history that I got that I wouldn't have got quickly otherwise. And then with the company that I was at, I got a severance package, plus they helped me to try to get another job. And without that, I don't know if I would have been able to easily get into my field. I don't know if I would have easily been able to go to college or not have to have that requirement to work full time to be able to live. So even though you have a really crappy situation come up, I would just always think, you know, why is this happening to me? Is it an opportunity to do something better? That maybe it's just like it's a stepping stone for something different that you're maybe not looking at the time. So I would keep that in mind, because that's the way I look at it now, and it actually worked out really well for me, because if I would have quit at that time, I would have never had those opportunities. So that's one of my big pieces of advice is there. But then also just cutting out as much expenditures as you can. Like my situation, I mean, luckily I was able to live with a family member to just cut rent out completely, because that was $700 just eating away every month. Plus you have to put your utilities on that, and you know, you just have general household expenses. So that type of thing, if I just cut all of that out, that was such a burden off of us. Even though it's not fun living with someone else, you're cutting off so much expenditures that it's really worth it. And then once we had paid off our student loan debt, we were still living with his mom. My dream was to buy a house, and at the time the market was it was pretty bad at the time. That's when things were starting to fail and just things were going awry. So I kept an eye on the market the whole time, but the whole time when I had my job, I just saved and saved and saved. Just hoarded all the money humanly possible that I could, did everything DIY, tried to save as much as humanly possible. That way I knew when the right opportunity came along that I could actually go and get a home, then I would be prepared. I would have my down payment, I would have money to furnish the house. These opportunities would be available to me because I worked really hard to save all that money in advance. When I got out of school, it wasn't the best economy. It took me a little bit to get a job in my field, but once I did, within 7 to 8 months, I was able to start looking for a home. And the home that we purchased was one of the best deals we've ever gotten. Because right now, our home value when we purchased it, it was up for $220,000. That's what it was being sold for. We talked them down to $202,000, which at the time was a lot for me. I was like, oh my gosh, this is like the max I wanted to spend. This is really scary, because you know, you never bought a home, and it's a, you know, it's a lot. But once I put that into it and we got the home, now that the economy's picked back up, we're looking at having almost a $300,000 home, just because we got it at a crappy time in the economy. And those would be some of the pieces of advice I have for you guys today. But I just wanted to kind of share where my debt story started. We have one car payment, and we have a house payment, and we have one revolving credit card, because I still do want to keep my credit up. But what I do at this point is I just pay off the balance every month. So I just use it for like my general expenses I'm gonna have to spend anyway. If I'm going to go get, you know, Starbucks or something, and I would buy that anyway, then I'm just gonna use the card for that, or use that money for that. And then at the end of the month, just pay it off. That way I can still earn some credit, keep my credit score up without having to go into debt for it. We're gonna have some more videos coming up about budgeting and ways to save money, but that's kind of where it's at today. So if this type of content interests you, then feel free to subscribe and turn on the notifications. That way you'll know when it is available to you to watch. All right, have a good night. Bye.